The Yakuza series has swiftly turned into one of my favourite video game series of all time. Now with the recent RGG Studio Summit 2022, it got me thinking as to one of the aspects that I love so much about it. It isn't afraid to challenge the concepts of masculinity, and in this video I'm hoping to go over why I think that. Now from the offset you can see how the Yakuza franchise can appeal to the basic male power fantasy. After all, it's written for men, by men, with all the testosterone fueled machismo that would not be too out of place in an 80s action movie with Stallone or Schwarzenegger in the titular role. This is what makes the Yakuza series so special, as it is the last game series you think would challenge those concepts. After all, these are the games in which buff professional criminals beat the absolute snot out of each other using their bare hands, baseball bats, knives, and the odd bicycle. In other words, Yakuza looks exactly like the sort of one-note violence that's so common in video games that often draw criticism nowadays. But when you get to know some of the main characters like the series lead Kazuma Kiryu and his friend slash rival Goro Majima, the quote-unquote good guys of the series. Not only do these guys represent the most emotionally nuanced, non-toxic and positive takes on masculinity that I've seen in a AAA game, the series uses them to make an important point about masculinity and honour. First off, let's talk about the series' most recognisable character in the saga. The cover star, the Dragon of Dojima himself, Kazuma Kiryu. Going by all the typical standards, Kiryu is everything that a leading man should be. He's tall, handsome, and tends to resolve his conflict with his fists. But behind all of that is a man who presents himself with a vulnerability and a willingness to let his emotions rise to the surface, something showcased across all of the Yakuza series. Throughout the series, Kiryu is consistently shown as one of the only members of the Yakuza who is in touch with himself. The characterization surfaces in many different ways, both subtle and overt. Setting aside the fact that the vast majority of the Yakuza franchise's side missions task Kiryu with selflessly helping regular people with their problems, Kiryu is one of the few protagonists in gaming who cries when a tragic event occurs, and not just in the righteous sadness way of showing emotions, but you feel his pain and you share in his agony when this perception of what a man should be breaks down due to the pressures of the world on him. Take Yakuza 0 for example, the prequel entry in the series which focuses on a 20-year-old Kiryu, fresh into the Yakuza game. Kiryu requests to join the Yakuza along with his adoptive brother Akira Nishiyama, his guardian Shintaro Kazuma, the man both men look up to, responds with a beating and a blunt refusal. In response, Kiryu breaks down, in a scene that sets the entire series in motion for how it tackles its portrayal of masculinity. Instead of getting up and fighting back or going behind Kazuma's wishes, Kiryu utters a line that has stuck with me since. Do orphans not get to dream? You see, Kiryu admires the man that Kazuma represents, the expensive car, the confidence, the power and respect that he has. But at that moment, Kiryu is overcome by emotions. It is these emotions that show Kazuma the strength Kiryu possesses. Kiryu's ability to be true to himself is what will ultimately allow him to become the kind of man Kazuma himself would respect. It's that vulnerability and willingness to feel emotion that are integral to part of Kiryu's character, both before and after the prequel. When Yakuza 0 came out in 2015 and 2017 in the West, some long-time fans of the series were already well acquainted with the powerful man Kiryu eventually becomes, but many others were meeting him for the first time, myself included. To myself and these people, the legendary Kazuma Kiryu was just another grunt in the system, someone who wasn't almost even allowed to join the Yakuza in the first place. Both of these perspectives are crucial to understanding Kiryu and the series as a whole. Throughout the series, Kiryu cries, howls and weeps, all while utterly unconcerned with how that might appear to those around him. To many of his fellow Yakuza, this is perceived as a sign of weakness. Nishiki's perfect counterpoint, the good-natured young man who had been Kiryu's adoptive brother in Yakuza 0, changes dramatically by the time Yakuza Kiwami takes place. He becomes cold and clinical, subbing out his flashy suit and bob cut for a white two-piece and slicked back hair. He speaks to him with sneering condescension. He becomes the embodiment of what a true Yakuza should be in the eyes of many, as he was looked down upon for always relying on Kiryu as they worked their way up the Yakuza hierarchy. Kiryu, on the other hand, treats everyone with the same focus in mind, being good, and treats people with the same respect. He helps women with their mundane problems, and some are not so mundane, as much as he helps men with theirs. At least in the remastered games, as the original ones do contain some very clear opinions of the times which they were made, and in the new ones he doesn't sexualise the women he helps out. Even in the side missions that lead chances for Kiryu to pursue a romantic interest, Kiryu never makes the first move, instead always waiting for the person in question to express romantic intent first, then responding. This is kind of undercut by the fact that you can date upward of 5 different women at once, but let's not include that. Kiryu is in the end a hopeless romantic. When he meets someone else who's struggling to live up to an image of themselves or wants the world to be something other than it is, he supports them with all the ferocity and passion in which he pursues his ideals. When Kiryu winds up looking after Haruka, a young girl who has suffered greatly, he will move heaven and earth to show her that a childlike, optimistic understanding of people doesn't have to be wrong. On the opposite side of Kiryu is Goro Majima, another fan favourite of the series who also goes through a similar shift throughout his journey in the series. Goro Majima, aka the Mad Dog of Shimano, is more of a wild card, all about living life according to his own rules, but he wasn't always this way. He's the perfect complement to Kiryu while having a few of the traits that make Kiryu so enjoyable. He does what he thinks is right, even if it has a roundabout way of doing it while defying orders. He has a lot of depth to him, his mad dog side, a caring side, and a certain loyalty to people he thinks deserve it. Though Majima can come across as a deeply violent and uncaring individual at times, when you play through his side of the story, you can see that he goes to great lengths. He is also shown to care deeply for his sworn brother Saejima and Kiryu. He is ordered not to help Saejima, but refuses to abandon him, and loses his eye as part of his punishment process. Then there are the hostesses at the Club Sunshine and many other side characters he helps along the way. It's his softer side to Majima that resonates with people. Sure, it's fun to see him beat off hordes of thugs and show his strength in boss battles, but it's also great to see him genuinely care for other people. The heartwarming moments the player sees from Majima all make his character so great. He may be tough, violent and bad-tempered at times, but on the other side of his personality he's kind, compassionate and good. For a game that's about Japanese organised crime, the ending of Yakuza 0 was oddly heart-wrenching. You see, after watching Majima fight so hard to protect Makoto, it was hard to watch when she doesn't recognise him in the end. While the fans may have been screaming at their screens for him to reveal who he was, his silence in the situation is one of the reasons he's such a beloved character. It's very clear to the player that Majima cares deeply for her. He can't tell her who he is because he thinks she'll be much happier without him. If Majima did tell her, would that make him happy? Sure. But he knows it'd be putting her in danger, and with all the trouble the Yakuza had already put her through, he knew he couldn't do that to her again. Sadly, even during the events of Yakuza Kiwami 2, which take place 18 years after Zero, he sees the pair reunited as Majima stops at the Osaka clinic where he first met Makoto, and finds that she still works there. She doesn't recognise him though, because she was blind for most of the events in Yakuza 0. He suffers for a massage treatment as she talks through her concerns about leaving Japan with her husband, without giving away the connection the two have to each other. Later, Majima sends Makoto a replacement strap for her watch, a treasured keepsake from her brother that figures prominently in the final moments of Yakuza 0. The gift gives her closure and affirms her decision to leave the country. Meanwhile, Majima is left to wonder and mourn at what might have been. Both Kiryu and Majima are devoted, hyper-masculine Yakuza. They rip their shirts off in a fiery passion before fighting. They literally can't walk down the street without somehow getting into fights with random hooligans. But it's what happens outside of these brawls that shows that they are anything but what their images precede them to be. Both the main narrative and side quests of each game thrust the characters into absurd situations. In Yakuza 0 alone, Kiryu teaches a shy dominatrix how to get better at her job, helps a beleaguered film team appease their director, and even helps a grown man accept that there's nothing wrong with being a virgin and enjoying a children's game. In each case, Kiryu's passionate encouragement helps these strangers reignite their passions and drives them to newfound confidence. Majima, meanwhile, makes it his literal job to validate and support the women in his employ, defending sex work as a profession and shutting down the men who try to trivialise it. Kiryu and Majima have a powerful, positive impact on virtually everyone they meet. They're also two of the sweetest, kindest and most genuine protagonists in video games. Whether they're singing karaoke, dancing at a disco, or managing cabaret clubs, or even playing games with children, Kiryu and Majima engage with the same intensity that they unleash when fighting armies of professional hitmen. That's what makes them so different, is that throughout their stories they both feel as though they have earned the right to be a good person. Now, with the most recent game, Like a Dragon, the series has shifted its focus to a new protagonist, Kasuga Ichiban, who in his very first outing has shown to be a strong core for what the series wants its leads to represent. For me, Ichiban can be summed up as not having the biggest of brains but the biggest of hearts. He is truly a lovable person who you find hard not to root for. The beginning of Like a Dragon shows that despite being Yakuza, unlike both Kiryu and Majima, Ichiban doesn't really fit the traditional mould. When he's sent out to collect protection money, he finds every excuse in the book to help the people he should be otherwise exploiting. In short, Ichiban is a failure as a Yakuza. He hasn't risen through the ranks, he's just a grunt at low-level family. Even with that in mind, he happily takes the fall to protect his family, and hence Ichiban could be called the Dragon of Rock Bottom. Ichiban is several years older than Kiryu was in the first few outings, but feels so much farther behind, for lack of a better term. Stuck in a place he doesn't know with no prospects, community, money or home, he, unlike Kiryu, does not meet anyone's ideals. And that's the part of what makes him so real and relatable. What also sets Ichiban aside is the bonds he forms across the game. With Ichiban, the game switches from an action beat 'em up to a JRPG style, and because of this he forms unbreakable bonds with those who join his party. In a Kiryu-led and centric Yakuza game, an RPG-like party system couldn't really exist. Kiryu was always willing to help others, but was defined by his stoicism and refusal to let people get too close. It's Ichiban that makes this work, by not only helping people in need, but bringing people together and seeing the best in them when they can't. He endears people to himself through courage, kindness, honesty, and sheer dumbassery. Ichiban is Kiryu's ideals incarnate, the physical manifestation of joy, kindness, and unrelenting selflessness. Even Ichiban's suit is a direct inversion of Kiryu's. Here he wears a maroon toothpiece with a grey dress shirt, as opposed to a maroon shirt and a grey suit. They are two sides of the same coin, united by the drive to effect good through empathy and kindness. What's more, Ichiban might be the only person in the world who cares about other people's opinions even less than Kiryu. This is best shown when Ichiban confronts the one he once considered a brother, Masato. Even though victory is within his grasp, Ichiban isn't interested in one-upping Masato. Despite having all of the power in this situation, he weeps and even begs. The only thing he wants is for his brother to feel loved. Now that we've discussed the three beacons of the series, we now have to discuss the villains of the series and what they represent. Throughout the series, Kiryu, Majima and Ichiban face off with male characters who have been warped by ambition, abuse, or deep emotional repression to get them to where they want to be, which is the top. It's this warping that causes them to violently and randomly lash out at other men, emotionally and physically abuse women, and betray trusted friends. Every game in the Yakuza franchise brings these destructive, toxic expressions of machismo into uncomfortable clear focus. And while these types of violence do not represent the entirety of the behaviours and attitudes that make up the toxic masculinity as a whole, the fact that the franchise acknowledges this, and not just as something exists, but as something that ruins lives and needs to be actively fought against. This is rare in AAA gaming, especially in an open world action game where you play as a criminal. Now, as mentioned earlier, one of these characters that gets corrupted by their ambitions is Kiryu's adopted brother Nishikiyama. Throughout the events of Yakuza 0, Nishikiyama is portrayed as both warm and loving, a bit impulsive and an emotional character. He and Kiryu both grew up in the same orphanage, raised by the same surrogate father, meaning they are not only sworn brothers in the Yakuza, but for all intents and purposes, family brothers as well. We see this when Nishiki is given the awful task of killing Kiryu, something he cannot do, and this leaves him in a crying husk as he could not do the one thing he promised he would do. Fast forward to the events of Yakuza Kiwami, and Nishikiyama has developed an inferiority complex born from being unfavourably compared with Kiryu by higher ups in the Yakuza, as Kiryu has passed every hurdle put in front of him, combined with a heartbreaking series of personal tragedies that culminate in the death of his sister. This causes Nishiki to choose to become cold and unfeeling, instead of confronting his intense pain and sadness. One important element of this is that Kiryu is not there to help him through this. Kiryu is in jail after taking the fall for Nishikiyama killing the head of the family, once again putting himself in Kiryu's shadow. He spends the duration of the game trying to prove himself by committing to the task he failed to do all those years ago, killing Kiryu, the one way he feels he can prove his value to the world at large. It's these types of antagonists that are seen throughout the Yakuza series, whether it be a personal favourite of mine, Kuze, a man who gets shamed by Kiryu and feels he has to avenge his pride to the point of fighting Kiryu no matter how broken his body may be. Then there's the emotionally cunning villain of Yakuza 6, Suwano Iwami, a man who destroys his own family to achieve his own goals. The lesson of the games it's trying to teach is clear. Toxic masculinity destroys everything it touches, but in the end it can itself be defeated by having a healthy relationship with your own emotions, one that enables you to take righteous, brave action to protect what you believe in. In the world of Yakuza, however, that action is reserved for men alone. Throughout the Yakuza series, where men have all the power to make their dreams reality with their fists, women are usually depicted as weak or childish. When a female character is introduced at any point in the story, you can bet it's only a matter of time before she's either taken hostage or murdered. Whereas the silly dreams of male characters are idealised and made beautiful, women's aspirations are often either ignored or mocked outright. Majima's love interest in Zero, Makoto, is repeatedly physically, sexually and emotionally abused, usually for no other purpose except to cast her as a victim. Although Majima does treat Makoto with compassion and respect, the game itself often doesn't. The fact that the Yakuza series views masculinity with such a subversive, empathetic tone makes its failings with regards to its female characters seem worse in contrast, even if those failings are far from unique in gaming at large. The main trio seem to treat women with more respect than the game itself does. They respect sex workers, they've never harassed hostesses. While the game's storylines may deny its female characters agency, Kiryu does encourage women to fight back against sexism, break out of abusive relationships, and strive for self-determination in any way that they can. There's also evidence that the folks who work on these games have their hearts in the right place, despite past missteps. There could be plenty more to speak about on this, and not just in the Yakuza series, but Japanese game development in general, but I'll try and save that for another video down the road. Throughout the series, what it means to be a Yakuza is all but impossible to separate from what it means to be a man, and that ultimately is what unifies all three of the series' most memorable protagonists, a brotherhood. Only the very best of friends or most formidable rivals in this series, they're sometimes the same person, are worthy of being called brother. Like most power fantasy characters, the main trio are meant to be aspirational. The difference is we don't want to like them because of what they can do. We want to like them because of who they are and what they do and represent. In a world where contemporary masculinity is often conflated with cynicism and irony, Majima, Ichiban and Kiryu's commitment to optimism, sincerity and standing for something is exactly what we need. Yakuza resists toxic tropes in a way that makes it easier to appreciate a healthier kind of masculinity in real life. When Kiryu cries uncontrollably, Majima gets a lump in his throat and Ichiban weeps, you realise that even the hardest people have soft interiors. It's these characters that are never afraid of expressing their feelings or treating vulnerable people with kindness that, more than the six packs and balled up fists, show what is true strength.